All right. This is a brief overview of the Mexican-American War. This is designed to help you complete your lecture notes. Remember, if you're feeling artistic and creative, I would encourage you to color in those notes, make them come alive, and see how they turn out. So here we go. So, who was the Mexican-American War fought between? We'll see. It is Mexico and the United States. When was the Mexican-American War fought? 1846 to 1848. And we'll take a look at some of the causes here of the war. So we've been taking a look at this picture here. Really what we're talking about is manifest destiny or westward expansion by the United States. One of the things that we need to understand is that the United States thought that they had the God-given right to expand our way of life, our territory from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Pacific. And now you could argue that they had their sights set on parts of Mexico. The big piece here that we have to understand on how this started was a dispute over the Texas border. Mexico believing that a river a little further north than the Rio Grande called the Nueces River was the border, whereas the United States and Texas believed that the border was at the Rio Grande. That kind of created the conditions for a skirmish, and American soldiers ended up dying, and that was what James K. Polk needed in order to convince the United States Congress to declare war on Mexico. So here's a look at the United States in 1846. You notice that the United States is really adding more states and territory further and further west. They have gone west of the Mississippi River. Now Texas represents that furthest west point of a U.S. state. We see some of the other territories that have been acquired by the United States. Some of them we would call unorganized. Still a lot of native peoples living in those areas. A lot of uncertainty surrounding their future. You see the Oregon Territory up in the Pacific Northwest, and then you see Mexico stretching as far north as the current state of Oregon. That would include places like California, New Mexico, and other states involved as well. So in April of 1846, the president, James K. Polk, orders Zachary Taylor, who becomes a future president, to move to that disputed territory between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande. The Mexican army crosses the Rio Grande, ultimately believing that they had been invaded by the U.S. Army, and this ends up in a skirmish where 11 soldiers are killed and U.S. Army patrolmen are captured. As this continues on, we see that Polk, because of this incident, asks Congress to declare war on Mexico. And his belief is that because American blood was spilled on American soil, that should be reason enough, despite it being a disputed territory between the two sides. Ultimately, this event is what pushed Congress to declare war on Mexico. I want to go through a few of the important battles, not all of them, but you'll see a few of these. Here we have one that takes place in California. You get this guy, John C. Fremont. He takes the Army of the West from Kansas over into California, and he joins the rebels there in California that want to overthrow the Mexican government, and ultimately captures their leader and establishes what becomes known as the Bear Flag Republic in June of 1846. Another battle that took place was the Battle of New Mexico, although I wouldn't call it much of a battle. Basically, the troops went in there, and without even firing one shot, New Mexico and really the hub of this area known as New Mexico, Santa Fe, is now under U.S. control in August of 1846. So now the United States really goes on the offensive. They start traveling further south into the northern-ish territories and really heading further south, actually, into New Mexico. We see a battle at Buena Vista. We see that the progress is being slowed a little bit by Santa Anna's army, but ultimately they keep retreating further and further south towards Mexico City. Another one would be the Battle at Veracruz. This is led by General Winfield Scott. He takes his army on the march and really battles for like 6 months. He goes to Veracruz, Monterrey, and then on to Chapultepec and Mexico City by September of 1847. There were a lot of bad battles that took place, a lot of fighting, a lot of death on both sides. We see at Chapultepec what ends up happening is that Mexican cadets, so really young men, 6 historically we know of that fought to the death versus surrendering to American forces. But ultimately, with the fall of Mexico City, comes the end of the Mexican-American War. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo is the agreement between the two. So in 1848, this treaty is signed. Mexico recognizes the Rio Grande as the southern border of Texas. The Mexican cession really is about the land that Mexico ceded or handed over to the United States. And this would include California, New Mexico, and then, modern day states like Nevada, Arizona, and a few others. The U.S. does pay $15 million to Mexico for the lands and assumes any claims Americans held against Mexico. And the other piece is that the United States actually promised to protect and take care of the Mexican citizens that remained in the new United States. So basically, that border kind of flew over them, and now they are living in the United States. So we know that this didn't really. The United States didn't really follow through on this, but nonetheless, that was one of the conditions or details of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Now, some senators argued that we had no right to all the land that Mexico handed over to us except for Texas, and others said it wasn't enough. We should have taken all of Mexico. So we see, kind of these opposing arguments that both oppose the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. So kind of an interesting little tidbit there. So there's a picture of the Mexican cession, all the land that was handed over to the United States in 1848. And then the last little piece there is the Gadsden Purchase, and this was bought to create a transcontinental railroad in the South. The land's a little flatter there, and the United States paid $10 million to get that last little piece to the puzzle that we know today as the continental United States. So there you have it, the Mexican-American War. Make sure that if you have any questions, you ask Mr. Orm, but do your best to get those notes filled out. Color them up if you can. And of course, double check your reading notes. Make sure you've got those as well. All right, we will see you later.